The sun was slowly beginning to rise. Percy and Jules were soundly asleep in a hotel room she had managed to rent out. Percy was snoring on a king-sized bed in the corner of the room, while Jules was asleep in a chair with her head on the table in front of her. The hotel room was small, yet nice. There were a few birds outside the window, singing their song to welcome the beginning of a new day. A phone on the bedside table began to go off. Jules woke up with a start and fell off her chair.
Ow!
She rubbed her side. The phone was still going off, and Percy was still snoring. Jules stood up and walked over to the bed, turning off the alarm on Percy's phone. She began shaking him.
Percy, get up.
He groaned and rolled over.
5 more minutes.
Come on, get up. There's coffee on the counter.
Jules shook him once more. Percy's eyes shot open.
Coffee?
Yes, coffee. Now up.
Percy rolled out of the bed.
You got my attention. Let's get going.
Jules began rubbing her side again. It was starting to throb.
Okay, hold up. We aren't leaving yet. We need to discuss this case file that you've forgotten.
Percy looked a little confused.
Yes? What about it?
Jules made her way back to the table and sat down in a chair.
There's a little more information that you didn't see.
She motioned for him to take the other seat next to her. Percy sat down, still confused.
There is?
Jules nodded and slid a cup of coffee to him.
Drink that before you pass out on the table.
Percy, without thinking, gulped down the scorching hot coffee and began coughing.
Continue.
Jules stared at him for a moment, wondering what convinced him to do that.
Well, most of our files have been digitalized for safekeeping. There's a little more info on here.
She moved her laptop over to him, pointing at a bar under the photograph.
There's the new address of the family you mentioned last night.
Percy stared at the screen for a moment. She was right. There was more information on here.
Oh, well, bless the convenience of modern-day technology. Should we pay them a visit for questioning before continuing to the old house?
Jules was taking a sip of her coffee.
Probably. It would be better to know more of the story before we go on.
Percy jumped out of his seat.
Fine by me. You drive this time. I'm taking all these extra coffee cups with me.
He began moving towards the kitchen counter, but Jules caught the back of his shirt and pulled him back.
That's not a good idea. Well, I mean, me driving is definitely a better idea than you driving, but I rented out this room for a little while. Why don't you leave some of those coffee cups here?
He stopped and began to pout.
Fine.
He stood up, took Jules' hand off his shirt, and began to fix it.
So, are we staying at this midway point until we solve the case then?
Jules put her mug of coffee in the sink and moved over towards the door, grabbing his coat.
Pretty much, unless you have another idea?
As she said this, she chucked his coat onto his head and grabbed her own to put on. Percy's face got hit with the coat.
Hey, that sounds good enough to me.
He put his coat on and stared at Jules.
That hurt.
She began laughing.
Sorry about that.
Percy joined in.
Hey, you're okay. It didn't actually hurt too much. Do you need any breakfast before we leave?
He turned toward the tiny fridge in the corner of the room. Jules stopped him again.
I wouldn't suggest eating anything in there. It looks like the last people in this room forgot a few things. And they haven't been here for a year now.
Percy jumped away from the fridge.
That's a good idea. I'm staying away from that. This hotel hasn't seen many visitors since then, huh?
Jules was over by the door and opened it.
That's right. I did a little research on that while you were asleep.
Percy grabbed another cup of coffee and was drinking it carefully this time.
Research about this hotel, you mean?
She nodded.
That and the family we're about to interrogate.
He began to slowly walk out the door.
So what did you find?
Jules was already at the car and was climbing in.
When it comes to our room or the family? Going to have to be specific here.
Percy rushed over to the passenger side.
Hey, don't leave without me. I want to know more about this room if we're going to be staying in it for so long.
Jules started up the car and glanced at Percy as he was fumbling with his seatbelt in a hurry.
First off, you just jump onto the car if I tried to leave you, and I, for one, don't feel like paying for your medical bill. Second, when it comes to the hotel room, I think it may be linked to the case we're doing.
Percy had finally managed to buckle up while she said this.
Really? You think so? Maybe we can catch some paranormal activity at the hotel then, too.
He was starting to bounce in his seat. Jules pulled the car out of the parking lot onto the main road, heading to the address they had found.
Perhaps. But for now, let's worry about one thing at a time. We should be there in the next few minutes.
Percy looked out the window. Now he was confused.
Already? Whoa, I didn't know we were that close.
Jules shrugged a bit.
I took a shortcut. If we watch the news tonight, ignore the car going 85 miles through an open field story.
Percy stared at Jules for a moment.
And I thought I was bad at driving.
The sun was beginning to rise to its high noon position. Jules started to pull the car into a long driveway of a small one-story cottage. She unbuckled and looked at Percy.
Are you ready, or do you have any questions?
Percy took a deep breath.
I'm ready. All right, we got this. Let's go kick some ghost butt.
He began fumbling with his seatbelt again. This time, Jules reached over and unbuckled him easily. He cleared his throat.
Thank you. Anyway!
Percy jumped out of the car and pulled Jules out with him. Jules tried to follow him to the front door, but he kept on dragging her. They both were standing in front of the door. They were standing on an open porch with an overhang. It looked very old. There were cobwebs everywhere and dust bunnies in every nook and cranny. Percy looked down at Jules, then at the sky. The sun was already setting. Jules leaned against the railing of the fence.
Are they even awake?
She sounded a little concerned. Percy shrugged.
I'm not sure. Should we knock?
He paused for a moment to rephrase something.
Should you knock?
Jules rolled her eyes.
Let's wait for a little while.
She laid her head on her arms and closed her eyes for a bit. Percy was quietly pacing the porch for the whole time. The moon let itself be seen and shined brightly throughout the night. Jules was sound asleep, leaning against the railing. Percy was still pacing and jumping at every small noise there was. The moon finally began to set, and the sun was slowly rising to welcome the new coming morning. Percy was leaning groggily against the railing.
Jules, are you gonna knock on the door or what? I don't want my fingerprints on the house.
He groaned and grabbed her shoulders and began shaking her.
Jules, come on, you slept all night.
Jules jumped in his grip and looked terrified.
I'm up!
Percy jumped back himself, not sure what just happened.
Whoa, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
He reached over and patted her back. Jules stiffened at the touch, grabbed his hand, and took it off her shoulder.
It's fine.
He nodded as if remembering something.
Oh, right, no touchy. So, are you gonna knock on the door, or shall I?
Jules yawned and moved in front of the door.
I'm knocking.
Percy smiled.
Thank you.
Jules managed a small smile and knocked on the door a few times. Percy quickly hid behind the railing and watched eagerly. Jules sighed.
Come on, Pert.
The door suddenly opened and a shotgun was pointed at Jules' face. Jules stiffened and put her hands up.
What the hell?
Percy screamed and ducked down.
Ah, please don't hurt us. I have instant coffee cups I can give you.
He threw a couple at the door. In the doorway there was an old man standing there, still pointing his gun at Jules.
What the hell are you doing here?
Jules answered first.
We just want to ask a few questions about the disappearance of your daughter. That's all.
The old man seemed to relax a bit and lowered his gun.
Let me see a badge,
he said gruffly. Percy began to fumble for something and pulled out his badge to show the old man.
So it says paperwork department, but ignore that part. I'm a real detective, and this is my partner.
The old man looked at his badge and then back at Percy.
I need a real badge, mister.
He turned and looked at Jules.
Do you have a badge, miss?
Jules slowly pulled her badge out and showed it to him. The old man nodded and moved to the side.
Come in.
Jules leaned down and grabbed the back of Percy's shirt.
Come on, chicken.
She dragged him inside the house. Percy crossed his arms and began pouting.
I am too a real detective.
He began mumbling so only Jules could hear.
Jerk thinks he can hide behind a gun.
Jules sets Percy on the couch and leans down towards his ear.
Let's not make the man with a gun angry, shall we?
Percy seemed to resign.
Okay.
The old man closed the front door and walked over to an old, decaying armchair next to the couch. He set the gun down next to his chair.
So, what questions do you two have?